Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute's offering tonight, Sustainability in the Gulf, Environment, Civics, and Dynamic Communities. My name is Dean Williamson, and I'm the Director of Faculty and Staff Community Affairs and University Operations Initiatives here at NYU Abu Dhabi, sustainability being one of them. Just so there's no confusion, my real name is Dean. It's not an academic title, although I'm still hoping for Dean Williamson. So everybody cross their fingers, please. I want to offer you all a very warm and sustainable welcome this evening. After talking to these four before the program began, I can assure you it is going to be a lively and provocative discussion surrounding sustainability. But before we begin, I would like to publicly thank those who have and continue to contribute to our robust sustainability initiative here at NYU Abu Dhabi. I want to first thank the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute for allowing us to do this important program. Thank you. Thank you. Certainly our NYU Abu Dhabi leadership and our government partners, Tamkeen, for their ongoing support. Our Sustainability Executive Committee, which is made up of faculty, students, and staff. Our facilities team, including our environmental health and safety department. Student life and community outreach. Our contractors, Abu Dhabi National Hotels and Serco, but most importantly, and I'm glad there's some students here in the audience tonight, our driving force behind our sustainability initiative are students, and most particularly the students from eCoherence and the Sustainability Committee. Thank you to all of those that I just mentioned above. Let me quickly outline what we have planned for you this evening. I'm going to introduce our panel. We'll begin our program, and then we'll allow time for your questions, and I hope you have a lot of them. And at the conclusion of the event, ladies and gentlemen, please join us in the lobby for a reception. So let us begin. I'm going to start by introducing the panel, and first up is Hamid Al-Amari, the Qatari guy, better known as. Hamid is a social commentator who explores the intersection between Gulf cultures and modern international trends. He is an entrepreneur. He's a filmmaker. He's an advertising consultant. He's a brand ambassador, and last but not least, an excellent comedian. Charles Blaschke IV is on a mission, ladies and gentlemen, and that mission is to change the world by reducing energy consumption through technology. He is the founder and managing director of Taka Solutions, a company that upgrades buildings to reduce their energy and water consumption. I also want to thank Charles for stepping in at the last minute to replace someone who could not be here this evening. Thank you, Charles. Samer Kamal, there on the end, is a social entrepreneur who has been developing sustainable businesses for the last 15 years. He was the founder of the leading environmental company in the GCC, BIA, and is a sustainability advisor to a number of global organizations, including NYU Abu Dhabi. Samer has been an invaluable advisor and coordinator for NYU Abu Dhabi Sustainability Initiative. Believe me, I work very closely with him, and thank you, Samer. In fact, this evening would not be possible without his hard work and commitment to NYU Abu Dhabi. And we have two new fathers on the panel, so I thought I would like to mention that. Are they both baby girls? Yes. And both very recent? Congratulations to you both. Neither of them have slept in weeks. Now, last but not least, our illustrious and fabulous moderator. Claire Woodcraft is the CEO of Emirates Foundation, the national foundation of the UAE established by the UAE Crown Prince, where she has been responsible for helping young nationals to create sustainable and scalable social enterprises with measurable output. Claire is passionate about effective philanthropy and speaks and writes regularly on catalytic and venture philanthropy. So, my dear Claire, I turn this over to you and your illustrious panel. It's all in your hands. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Dean. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Big thank you to New York University for welcoming us here tonight, and thanks to all of you. For those of you that feel you're too far away, please feel free to come down to the front where you can heckle us more effectively. And a small apology to the ladies for the gender diversity of the panel. Hence, I would encourage you all to speak up during the discussion, so we still make sure that our voices are heard a At least we have two fathers of two young girls, so we're making sure we're fully represented. So this evening's conversation is going to be, as Dean outlined, looking at some of the issues in the GCC around sustainability, specifically environment, but more broadly, how can we collectively as a community do more in this space and ensure that we're on the right track. So you will be aware that some of the challenges historically in this part of the region has been criticism around not doing enough, around not having a strong enough civil society to really challenge perhaps what the formal government sectors are doing, while at the same time we are often seeing a lot of first-to-market innovation here in the region, and actually some very pioneering projects. So we really want to have a discussion about, is the GCC doing enough? Could it be doing more? Or is it actually bringing some world-class innovation into the region and fast-tracking other parts of the world? So before we delve into the panel discussions, I want to just have a quick, highly scientific poll by putting up your hands, asking you in the audience, who here thinks that, we'll pick on the UAE specifically, the UAE is not doing enough around sustainability and environmental protection? Maybe 50-50? Okay, so we're going to revisit that perception at the end of our discussions and see how convincing our arguments are. So I want to start off by my own personal lesson, if you like, around working in the space myself with corporations and the like. My conclusion is that sustainability really is about mindset, and environmental protection is about mindset. You can have policy, you can have regulation, you can have international standards, but it's really about having conviction, particularly amongst leadership, but also more broadly in the community. Hamid, let's start with you. Give us your perspective. So you have this wonderful bi-nationality. You're half Irish and half Qatari. So you really have some insights into how people approach this issue, both from the West and the East. What do you think it is that can bring conviction to the individual? What makes people realize the importance of this subject?
First of all, good evening. Hello. He said I was a comedian, so I'll try and be funny. Thanks. To be honest, I grew up in Ireland, and then I moved back to Qatar in 2011, and I was in Cardiff for university. So growing up with that it was a culture that was already embedded in the society, which was that you recycled, you walked to school, granted the environment and the weather would help with the whole walking and cycling to school and public transport and things like that. But coming back to Qatar in 2011, it was almost like there was no awareness of it back then. And I think one of the biggest things that needs to happen is awareness from a government side, but not only for the government to go out and tell the public how to act, but also open the door for young entrepreneurs to come in and because there is a market for it, but allow for young entrepreneurs who have ideas to tackle these issues and spread the awareness about it, to really just make their lives a lot easier in setting up and trying to get their message across. And I think focusing on, not to be biased or anything, but just the younger generation that's coming in with all these questions and want to do a lot more, just open the doors for them, I think.
So people say that Gen Y, millennials, however they want to be called, they have intrinsically a greater sense of social purpose. They are intrinsically more inclined to understand sustainability. Do you see that in Qatar?
No.
So do you think it has changed at all? So what's changing? If you think if the mentality is changing since you went back in 2011 until today, is there any change?
Yes, definitely. I'm not going to say that there is no change at all. There is a sense of awareness because of steps that the government has taken, but we still have a long, a huge hill to climb. But I'm more interested in the society and the culture and how they see it. People drive every day past these big billboards that say treat the environment, respect the environment, but at home, their AC is still on. The lights are on. They're driving very big cars, like 6.4 liters, 5.7 liters, right? But that's not enough to just put the, ad campaign out there. That's a really nice picture, and expect that to get the results out.
But and therein lies the challenge, indeed, around the mindset piece, right? So no amount of preaching or government telling you that you should be more energy efficient. I want to come back to the youth piece later on, but I want to jump to Samer. So Samer, you were involved. You kind of pioneered the whole waste management industry in the UAE, really, from an early stage. So I'm assuming you had a pretty high mountain to climb in terms of changing mindset. I mean, back in the day when you founded Beer, people weren't talking about waste management. There was no recycling. There was no conversation about recycling. How did you manage to convince the Sharjah government and associated stakeholders that this was the new way of thinking?
Well, you're right that there was very little of this discussion at the time. In fact, I think the discussion at the time was, you must be joking if you think there's going to be recycling in this part of the world. And what we managed to do in the discussion with the government of Sharjah was to talk about values and try to align the values of the leadership in Sharjah with the idea of environmental responsibility. Sharjah as an emirate's always been dedicated to being family friendly, to being a cultural center and the like. And it's very difficult to be a family friendly cultural center of the Middle East if you have garbage in the streets and no responsible conduct among people and the like. So the ruler was aligned with this idea that there was a need for behavioral change. And that underpins, in my opinion, how you start to move towards sustainability, because we're talking about a social contract. The government says we want to do something that is going to improve the environment. We're asking you as a community to be part of that. Your role is X. In the case of my project, the role was asking people to segregate their recyclables from non-recyclable waste and put them in 2 different bins. For me as a Canadian, not a complicated exercise, but I was indoctrinated over 25 years. Mm-hmm. And the biggest challenge in those social contracts is to make sure that the government or the private sector organization that is asking for behavioral change meets their end of the bargain. So they say to the community, we want you to change your behavior. And then the community says, can we rely on you to fulfill your side of the deal? And if they can't rely on that organization, or if they feel that they can't rely on that organization, then you lose them immediately. And once that trust is broken, that social contract doesn't exist anymore. And getting that back is actually harder than getting somebody to change their behavior in the first place. So
and you're touching on this this kind of sometimes prevalent perception that, well, there's no point in me dividing my garbage because actually, is it really going to get recycled? So I'm just not going to bother, even if I might do that in my home country. And that takes us nicely to Charles. So Charles, I mean, I think one of the challenges here is that even if people say, look, I do want to commit to sustainability and to environmental protection, and I don't want to be wasteful, but actually, how do I do it? You know, is it going to be a real headache, and is it worth me doing it? You've been looking at technology and the possibility of applying apps to just make this stuff easier. So talk to us about that challenge. So behavioral change is always difficult. Can we rely on technology to fast track it?
Yes. I guess the easy answer is yes. I think technology has the ability to fill the gap of human laziness, basically. And we were talking before we came up about how do we really get people to care, especially in this part of the world. I guess technically none of us here are from here. You're from the GCC. So, but you know, in the room, I don't know what the stats would be, but hardly anybody's from here. It's a very transient population, and so we don't have these roots here. And everyone in one way or another for different reasons is temporary. So we're all going to leave. So we don't have a real aligned interest with making this place permanent and great and not damaging it like we would if maybe we're in our home countries. Now, on the flip side, I think people are getting better. The population as a whole through education awareness, and because of the population mix, where they come from, they know and they care. And I think maybe Leonardo DiCaprio has something to do with that as well, because it's in the mainstream now, right? So like that's what it takes, is this general education and awareness. And so what we found was we help big buildings, similar to this, save a lot of energy, a lot of carbon, a lot of water, and a lot of money. And it makes sense from a business case. But what we kept hearing in the buildings, mainly residential and office buildings, is from the tenants. We heard, it's great you're making my building owner more rich, but are you going to help me save? And our answer is like, no, we're kind of busy doing all that big stuff on the roof. And then from the building owners, that same owner would say, it's great you're saving me all this money, but can you help my tenants, because I want my building to be really good. I want my tenants to be happy. And the answer is always like, no, but that's what they were saying as well. So from the app side, we decided, look, we need to find a way to get to the people, because there are people that are asking, there are people that care. And there are people that for two reasons want to save. One is money. I mean, in the end, like the main driver is money right now. But there are a lot more, like I said, that just want to do good. They want to save, and they want to know how to save, and they don't have that information. And so that's why we decided, like everybody, let's make an app. Like, it's the opposite end of what we do as a company. I mean, we do big contracting type stuff, and here we are with an app, right? And so every time we would mention that in these presentations, these meetings, we'd go through this whole spiel about paid from savings, retrofitting your building, saving you millions, and there's like an app at the end of the presentation.
And everybody wants to know about the app.
Oh, look at that app. You have an app? It's like, oh my God, did you not hear anything
It's a
else?
silver bullet.
So that's what we want to do, is make it for free, give it to people for free so they can start to be educated and save. And so that's...
You think that's going to be more powerful than preaching to people about the importance of recycling their garbage?
I think whether it's water, garbage, AC, whatever it is, I think it's a mechanism in a way that technology can make it so easy that people can do it.
I want to come back to the point you started with, though, saying, which I find bizarre, that people think here because we're transient, maybe people aren't from here, that therefore they shouldn't be interested. When, of course, protecting global resources is a public good. If I save water here in the UAE, it will impact the country where I came from. And what is it, do you think, that makes us be such, not in my backyard kind of mindset, rather than understanding that whatever environmental efforts you can make or commitment to sustainability you can make as an individual will have a global impact, because the environment is not country specific?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think what we found, and I believe now, is it's so non-tangible and it's so far into the future that, the AC in here is what, 21? We're consuming literally 36% more than we should, because it's at 21, not 23.
Yep.
Now I'm a little cold.
And if you ask people here, would you have your AC at 23? They'd freak out probably.
They either freak out or they just say, well, what's the difference? Like we're all now contributing to global warming.
I believe,
if I may, part of that issue, and we talked about this just in advance of the discussion, part of that issue is you look at things like air conditioning, is that there aren't systems of information. That's why your app and things like that become interesting, because there aren't systems of information that necessarily share with people how much AC they're consuming. I live in a building where I pay a flat rate per year for air conditioning, whether I use the AC or not, and it's the same rate for every apartment in the whole building.
So if you could show people, as I believe you are through your app, exactly how much they're saving by turning up the AC by 1 or 2. I think Japan has made it illegal now to have your AC below 23. So if you stay in a hotel in Japan, you actually cannot reduce the AC. And they've saved billions of dollars on their electricity bill. But just before we move on from mindset, back to you, Hamid, around the issue of, you touched on it, the big car, etc. This consumptive, acquisitive culture that we have in those countries where you have relatively high income in the Gulf and high disposable income. And so, and as Charles is saying, it's so far away in the future. So how do you convince your peers, a young Qatari, that, it's great that you can afford to consume at this level now, but you're damaging for future generations, for your children? Is that a conversation you can have?
I think Charles said that technology is changing. Communication is changing as well. You used the word, what was the word you used?
Consumptive culture, acquisitive culture.
Preaching.
Yeah.
That tone and that's changed. You know what I mean? The way people consume information now is very different. I think in most cases, the person telling the public what to do doesn't know how the public speaks. And let me make this simpler. It's an old dude talking to a young dude, and they're just not on the same level of communication. But also on the fact that there's a sudden introduction of wealth, and we can afford nice stuff now. And if I have a lot of money now to buy a really nice car, and you tell me, here, listen, you're gonna hurt someone who's not born yet, it's just natural to go, I don't care. It's a really nice car, and it's leather seats, and it's got, you know what I mean? So these like materialistic things, it's very hard to pull people away, because they've got into this culture now where if you're from the UK, you have tax on your car, you have NCTs, you have things like that, which, you know, if you want to drive a 918 Porsche in the UK, it's going to cost you a lot, and you could drive it here at just the flat fee of whatever the cost of the car.
Can you
is.
influence your peers, or do you think, I mean, obviously what you're saying is peer pressure is more important than somebody preaching, but do you find that personally you've managed to influence people around you?
I think it's more towards the way you communicate the message rather than the message itself. As I said, the billboard thing is, you just go past it. You don't know if they're advertising food, cars, nurseries. You don't know what's on that thing. It's a different way of communication. And what we've done in Qatar through the Isle of Qatar network, which I'm a partner in, it's the biggest social media network, where we've set up communities online, and we target specific communication to certain communities that the government doesn't have access to, because there's people don't want to talk about it, but there is a different class. There's different types of people that live. There's the really up there, there's people that don't earn as much, and there's the medium class or working class. And what we try to do is get access and tap into those communities that otherwise wouldn't know about these initiatives. And most of the times when we do volunteering to go and do beach cleans or things like that, it's that community that is taking part. So
Well, and
I think it's the way
yeah,
the communication is rather than the message.
and the reach. But it's important that you're talking to your peers as well. I mean, we run a financial literacy program at Emirates Foundation for young Emiratis, helping them to manage their personal finance better. And of course, we use peer-to-peer mentoring. But one of the things we've had to add to the program is how to combat peer pressure. So we have a bunch of young people who are saying, yeah, actually, I no longer buy the big car or upgrade the car every year. But the biggest challenge is not how they do it or how they finance it or how they manage a budget or savings. It's how do I combat the fact that my friends are bugging me.
Have a baby. If you have a baby, you can't buy anything.
That seems to be the solution to most things here. Okay, that's great. Let's move on from mindset then. And just to the audience, we're going to be taking your comments and questions, so please have them ready. And if you have a burning point now, feel free to raise your hand and I will pull you into the conversation early. But I want to move on to, as Dean said, the T word. Can't have a panel discussion without talking about Mr. Trump these days. So, we started this conversation by looking at, civil society in the Gulf. Is it different from the West? What is the role of civil society in terms of sustainability and environmental protection? And here we are with, the leader of the free world, which is not Angela Merkel, as the economists suggested, but actually, Mr. Trump now, a climate denier, the administration pulling apart some of the accords put in place by Obama, and indeed threatening to pull out of the Paris Agreement. So Samer, how do we deal with that, and how do we go to governments in the region and say, you guys really need to be doing more around environmental protection, when they will say, but look at the US government is now pulling back from that?
Yeah, I think we have an opportunity in the region. First of all, to go back to Charles's point, there are real economic opportunities when you become more sustainable as a society or as a corporation. So just talking to governments here about the economic opportunity that comes from wasting less resources. I think the environment industry actually uses some very simple words that often people don't realize have the double meaning. Like I was in the waste sector, which meant anything that went into the bag was waste. Why waste things if you can find a use for them? If you don't waste resources, you have more resources to use later. It's a simple economic input-output discussion. And these discussions are beginning to happen here in the region with governments that are not political discussions. These are economic discussions. These are rational discussions about resource management that are starting to happen. And in fact, I think what's been really interesting with Trump and other political figures around the world who are not necessarily supporting the environmental movement is we see things like support of coal in the U.S. and then the leading CEO of a coal company coming out and saying, well, we don't really think we're going to get many new jobs by changing policy towards coal in the U.S. It's already come and gone. And in the Gulf, what's really interesting is that we don't have a legacy investment in old 20th century infrastructure, where in the US they do. So we don't need to take a stepwise approach to the introduction of new technology, like new energy sources and the like. We can simply have the cheapest, one of the largest solar installations in the world happening, being constructed in Abu Dhabi, and another one in Dubai, because frankly we're going from a very simplistic, antiquated electrical network to a very advanced one without having the budgetary or legacy challenges of having to upgrade over time. So we actually have this great opportunity to jump right past all of those challenges.
You raised several points there, and I want to move to Charles, but I'll come back to it. So you still haven't answered the question, though, exactly, of how does one, therefore, convince governments? When you see, Trump, to me, just simply hasn't understood the argument that this stuff is good for business. You look at companies like Nike that have said, we want a closed-loop production cycle by 2020.
Yes.
Nothing, there will be no waste coming out of this business for all the reasons you point out, because it's common sense. If you're not wasting stuff, you're making more money. So Trump hasn't understood that bit yet. He hasn't understood that coal is no longer a viable fuel, even if you did want more jobs. Automation, anyway, is reducing the job opportunities in the coal sector, and even coal people themselves say, let's move on. But I want to move to Charles around the local corporates that are getting this stuff. But also, the solar thing is interesting, and maybe you can address that as well, Charles. And sorry, I'm throwing out multiple questions. But for many years, it's the one thing you heard in the region. Why on earth is there no solar power in the Middle East? If there's one thing we have in abundance, even more than oil, it's sun. And my understanding was that back in the day, you simply had too much, bizarrely, dust on solar panels to be able to extract sufficient output. But now we have dealt with new photovoltaic and technology. So talk to us a little bit, Charles, about how local companies are grasping the opportunity to business that Trump and his team apparently have not.
Yeah, so you rightfully mentioned the solar aspect. With the price of solar coming down as it has through the technology and as crazy as it sounds, finding ways to clean them efficiently. Whenever I used to hear that, I thought that somebody's crazy, just go wipe them down. But then you have the whole energy water nexus where there's no water here. So if you use water to clean them, you're actually doing a lot of harm. So, and then, yeah, we've seen some crazy stuff in solar, and it's all over the news. It's all over the world. World record low cost for solar PV plants, which is great because for the way we see it is it's a two-pronged approach. There needs to be this renewable supply, and solar fills that gap right now. There's not anything really that's great other than solar that does that. But the other side of that is people need to reduce their consumption, and so we see both. We see obviously the big governments in the region now doing crazy stuff with solar and the cost that they're doing, which is a step in the right direction. Setting some good targets. I think Dubai is 21% by 2030. I should know that. I don't know if it's 21%. It used to be 15, so they upped it about 3 months ago to 21%, which is ambitious. That's really good. And so there's a lot of people doing big things outside of the government. So that's all PPP type stuff where the government's buying that solar power. There's companies that are doing $100 million, $1 billion solar plants, waste to energy. nuclear as well, but I guess that's kind of separate. And people that are really taking efficiency to the next step as well, and doing big things to drastically reduce their carbon output. And it's not just to save money. It's not just for marketing. It's because they know it works and they believe in it. So there's a lot of big people, both public and private now, that are doing this.
And some interesting, I mean, I saw you working with international companies a lot, but also the likes of Majid Al Futtaim and DP World, D-Ware, of course, we talked about earlier, really taking a lead on some of the stuff, which is great to see.
Yep.
Local companies as well as international. Let's go back to government and Trumpism. Hamad, do you see that Qatar, obviously a very well-established oil and gas economy, when they look at what's happening in the US, does the Qatari government and other Gulf governments, do you think, say, well, you know what, if those guys are no longer committed to global standards around sustainability, then why should we? Or do you think the government of Qatar has that foresight and understanding that this is the way of the future?
Yeah, I think what's happening in Qatar, I mean, Qatar hosted the COP18, so it's when the biggest climate UN conference in the world, there is a step to diversifying the economy. A big part of Qatar and the vision of the country is to diversify the economy and not rely only on hydrocarbons and oil. But I don't think it's because they see it on one side of the world going, oh, they've neglected it, so that's not for us. I think they understand that there is an economic benefit. I mean, there's other segments that are, well, it's not just sustainability, there's national food programs, there's other things that are sustainable, not just environment. I mean, Qatar is, its geography is not ideal for us to be not leading, but we have taken a step towards maintaining the legacy of COP18. I just think that it doesn't trickle down as well. The message doesn't trickle down into the society as much as it should, in my opinion. But I don't think that it's fair to say that, oh, it's happening in the West, so we'll follow suit. I don't think that that's the case.
So you're still optimistic that there is a commitment broadly to follow up on the COP and
yes, definitely.
maintain that kind of...
They had a heavy involvement in Paris as well as a Qatari delegation. So they understand that is a step forward. So, yeah, but there's things that are happening in Qatar that should change. One is that locals and nationals don't pay electricity and water bills.
Is there any effort at the moment to show the subsidy, the true cost?
They've introduced a plan to have everyone on an average spend or average consumption. So they've calculated the average consumption of a household, and anything you use over that you will be charged and have to pay for. But for me, people are earning enough, in my opinion, to be able to pay for electricity and water. I don't think, if you have 6 Lexuses parked outside, I think you should be able to pay 600 dirhams or 1,000 dirhams a month for your electricity and water. So there is that kind of, but it's also sensitive in going to people saying, oh, you have to pay or introduce a tax or introduce I worked on a campaign for Tarsheed, which is the water conserving part of Kahraman, which is the electricity and water company. And it was a successful campaign. And people would come up to me and go, oh, I saw your thing on TV. But I feel like they don't hear what you're saying. They see the nice effects and the video graphics and things like that. But when you tell them, basically the campaign is me moaning about them wasting water and telling them that they've implemented fines. For example, one fine is if you are washing your car at home without using proper pressure machine, the fine is 10,000 riyals. So there was huge fines, but the implementation of the law or the enforcement is not, because I see my neighbors, I see what they're doing, and I can't report them because they know who I am. So, but
maybe you can use social media to put a bit of peer pressure.
Oh, I do.
Name and shame.
I tweet people's the way they park and the way they, I tweet it. I don't name them, but there are some tweets out there.
Good stuff. And we did mention Paris. I mean, I always think the wonderful thing about Paris is that talking of countries disagreeing. 192 countries. I think it was the first time ever in the history of the universe that 192 countries have agreed to something. It was really quite a powerful agreement. So disturbing to see that the US is thinking of pulling out. Let's hope not. Do we have any questions in the room? If we do, I think we don't have an extra mic, so we're going to borrow one of these. And gentlemen, if you can share yours. Okay, only one? No? Okay, fine. So just put your hands up if you have a question. But while we get the mics to those people, let's come back to the issue. Charles, I want to talk about your approach now. So you're obviously working very much with the private sector and, in this very big sort of corporate world, but you have kind of been dragged somewhat, maybe not kicking and screaming, into the whole social piece as well. You kind of suddenly had the epiphany that you are actually a social entrepreneur because what you're doing is creating social value, and you won the Venture Prize, the regional award for social entrepreneurs. So do you see that, and to me, this is a large part of the solution, that actually we are this hybrid business model where organizations with a social purpose are now working much more with organizations with a commercial purpose. Is that trend going to help us address this issue?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the key to making drastic change. I think using the power of business and capitalism to drive massive social change is probably the only way we're truly going to get there. Technology I mentioned earlier, but from a business model, I mean, this makes sense. It's feasible. Whether it's waste, whether it's solar, whether it's efficiency, it makes sense for everybody. It makes sense for the company. It makes sense for the customer. It makes sense for the environment and everybody in between. And so, yeah, we kind of had an epiphany and realized we were a social enterprise. To be honest, we didn't know that until we looked into it. Until we looked into it, we're a business. We thought we're a business. It makes money.
You're a responsible business, and actually at the end of the day we don't even need the terminology social enterprise. If businesses act responsibly, then we're kind of, that becomes business as usual, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And we lose the need for the moniker.
Yeah, and you could say in our hearts we feel good for what we do, because the more money we make means we're doing more better for the world, which is great. It's an amazing concept, and when we learned that, we kind of repositioned ourselves, and everyone got really excited. And so, yeah, and that's also what made us realize that what we do is so intangible into the future, right? We save, I should know this. Gosh, never mind.
We'll come back to you.
Yeah, no, I know roughly. We save 500 kilograms of carbon an hour in our current projects. Wow. I don't even know what that is, to be honest. I don't know what a kilogram of carbon is. It's at this table. I don't know. But when you look at it, it's a lot. It's a ton. No, it's not a ton. It's a kilogram. Sorry. It's a lot. It's 500 kilograms
Maybe
an hour.
maths was never your strong point,
Yeah,
Charles.
I never claimed to be smart.
Okay. So, yeah, please go ahead. Do you want to just grab the mic?
We're talking about your role, right? But when I see other corporate entities and the bigger ones, like say, for example, in Qatar, they're looking at it as a CSR. So they'll take part in Earth Hour and think that they've done the world a huge favor, right?
Well, they all like candles which are emitting...
But then there's like National No Paper Day and Carpool Day. But it's, seriously, I mean, if you're going to be one of them who go, oh, yeah, look, I didn't drive to work today, and we want to have this discussion about sustainability in the future, and it goes from the top down, and if the company's okay with it, and they come out in the papers and tweet about it and go into the public and say we took part in Earth Hour, like we should go, hey, why, yay, do you know what I mean? That's not where that's where we are right now.
So giving people the wrong impression that actually you've done something systemic when you've just had a nice day off work. But I want to come back to you, and I promised to come back to that earlier. I'm going to go to this lady here now, if you have the mic. Sorry. Okay, so then this lady here. So the lady in blue, but around the issue of youth, because you said you didn't agree, but I like to think, and I pray that it is true that youth are intrinsically more inclined to understand sustainability and have a sense of social purpose. But I want to hear more about that, and I'm sure we have lots of young people in the audience. This lady, please just give us your name first and your organization.
Hello, my name is Etidan. Thank you for the valuable lecture. Indeed, from our experience in construction, what we can see that it's not the people itself, rather than the standards and regulations in building and constructions, still
Behind the
big
curve?
percentage of the buildings are built in the wrong way, using the wrong material, using the wrong design, getting it from the way of the walls to the way of the spaces, to the compartments, to the trunking, to all kind of compressors, which doesn't require to have or to save the maintain the temperature.
So your
Most of
question
the
is,
buildings,
how do we deal with that?
the buildings are, and buildings has to set into a standard to be approved by the authority, and the stakeholders to have a minimum requirement to establish a less consumption of power and better managed buildings with sensors and integrations of all ELVs.
So your question is?
My question is to start with the authorities, but rather than blaming, I'm not really questioning, rather just adding.
Let's,
if we will come to the apps and the building is badly managed, badly constructed, we cannot even put any,
so
any
I
ads.
think, thank you for that question. So one for Charles and Sam, if you also want to comment, because you have an insight into the regulatory framework as well. So Charles, is it that we need nationwide better regulations?
Yes, the easy answer, I 100% agree. That's the only reason we're in business. You know, we tell people we wish we didn't have to fix all the bad buildings, because every building is bad. Every building in the UAE is bad. It consumes at least 20% more than it should, in most cases 50%. And that's, like I said, it's the only reason we're in business. And so your question, I didn't put my hand up earlier, is the government doing enough? I would kind of say no. In specific, like the question, the regulation around building energy performance could be much stricter, and it wouldn't have much of a material effect on the developers and the owners.
Right.
It'd make indoor air quality, energy performance, materials, everything better, and it would save literally 30% of the world, of the country's energy use.
Wow. Samer, why isn't the government doing more then? You've worked closely with the government on this issue.
Yeah, I think there's a challenge that the government faces. The government is established to in that regard to set regulations. That's a very conservative position that they take, which is we want to do things that we think are safe. How safe? Well, we want to work within the confines of the systems that we understand. We'll only take risk at the sort of outer extreme of that. There's an opportunity to change that with organizations like Taka Solutions, who are showing that you can be more efficient in a building and not impact negatively on safety or comfort for the users and the like. I think that there's an element of we see this all over the world, industry leading policy as opposed to industry following policy. Industry follows policy anyways. We're all in compliance, or unless you're running a company illegally, you're generally in compliance with government regulations. But if you're not leading policy, then you're victim to policy. And I think that the construction industry here has a real opportunity to come together as an industry to have associations that are trying to drive changes at the government level and assure the government stakeholders whose job it is to be regulators and conservative to say, you're not taking a risk here. Quite the opposite. The risk is by not changing.
Is there a certain irony about that happening in a country that has ambitions to build the first city that has zero carbon footprint?
We were doing that.
It depends who gets there first. Is there a certain... Yeah, I think there's definitely an irony to it. I think there's, again, as I sort of talked about earlier, there's an opportunity too. I mean, we're talking about quite old building standards and a real opportunity to jump from them into something quite new. I don't know if you agree with that, Charles.
I mean, we've seen in Masdar City, I mean, the kind of level of innovation is just incredible. I mean, this is world-class innovation at a project-specific level. So how do we then take that to a UAE-wide approach?
I think it goes back to what Samer said earlier. We don't have this old aging infrastructure here, and the buildings are not that old. Some of them are getting old. So there is an opportunity to leapfrog And so if you look at any leapfrog studies around any technology in any country, we don't have to break the old norms. We can basically come in, and because the power of technology and the cost of it. So Internet of Things, IoT, it's a buzzword. I don't know how many people know it. Artificial intelligence, another buzzword. So basically that's what we do. We apply that to these old buildings, and that's how you can get massive savings. So when that is scalable, we can make those impacts without having to disrupt a big system. So yeah, policy, I understand why the governments don't enforce certain things in construction, but it also does leave big opportunities.
I live in one of the oldest buildings I live on Sheikh Zayed Road in Dubai, and one of the oldest buildings on the Sheikh Zayed Road strip. It's 21 years old.
Ancient.
Yes, it's horribly old building. Yeah. So there really are opportunities, I think, that are not even seen yet.